I must be losing my mind. I don't remember turning the camera on. But there's no reason for the web show to be spying right now because Meg's not even home. But the camera was on. I mean, I know about the web show spying in the last episode. And then the bloody creator being a little smartass. Moving on. So I'm doing a SpongeBob double feature. But the good news is the stories are not bad. I actually got a request for the second story, but the reason why I'm including the first story is because the two stories are connected. You see, the second story that I'll be doing in this fanfiction review is the sequel to the first story I'm going to be taking a look at. So the first story is Some Things Never Change. The author, for both obviously, is WDGHK. Interesting username. So SpongeBob SquarePants, the cartoon that will never end. A world where time stands still. What if it didn't? So it's rated fiction K, it's in English, it's humor parody, which I wouldn't say it's a parody. It's SpongeBob, Squidward, Sandy as the main characters in this. It's over 4,000 words, 7 reviews, 12 faves, 5 follows, and it was published back in November 2020. Author's note. For all you Snowflake fanboys, this one-shot is not me trying to make some big statement or attack anyone. It's just a simple humor parody one-shot fic poking fun at a show that has long since worn out its welcome. Well, I know plenty of shows that have done that. So both stories are from Squidward's point of view. And Squidward has been lamenting about how things have not changed for the last 20 years of him working at the Krabby Patty with SpongeBob. Like, SpongeBob hasn't changed at all. And, you know, Squidward, when he had first met SpongeBob, he was a little more lenient of SpongeBob's nonsense because, you know, SpongeBob was so innocent and he was, you know, a kid then. But now, SpongeBob is like a middle-aged sponge. Now, it's implied that Squidward is going to be turning 60 in this story, or he's on the verge of becoming 60. So, you know, he's regretful about how his life has been, you know, regretful how he's always a failure, and that he still works at the same dead-end job that he's been working at for 20 years. So he's currently at work while he's thinking about all of this. He's the cashier. He's at his position. SpongeBob, of course, greets him and is poking and prodding at him, trying to ask how, you know, the dancing competition, I think it was a dancing competition that Squidward had participated in, went. And, you know, Squidward's like, well, like all the other times, I have failed. And to rub salt into the wound, Squidward got injured during this last competition, so Squidward has pretty much accepted the fact that he's just not going to do the competition anymore. Now, SpongeBob, being super optimistic, is trying to get Squidward to not give up and to just keep trying, and, like, you know, SpongeBob keeps going on about how he keeps trying to get his boating license, which I guess that's an ongoing joke that SpongeBob can't get his boating license because he can't drive at all. But, you know, unlike Squidward, he just continues to be optimistic. So, what happens next is that Mr. Krabs comes in, and he tells the boys that he's going to New Kelp City for a fast food congress. Although it's heavily implied that this is not what Mr. Krabs is doing. In fact, it's implied that he's actually looking for the Holy Grail, I think. And he's leaving the Krusty Krabs in the hands of SpongeBob and Squidward. So Squidward is going to be acting as manager while he's gone. So, you know, Squidward is being all sarcastic and stuff with Mr. Krabs as usual, but, you know, he accepts, you know, the task given to him. So Mr. Crab leaves. And then right after Mr. Crab leaves, that's when Sandy comes in. And Sandy has Gary. Supposedly, Gary was staying at Mr. Blue's farm. Yeah, Uncle Blue's farm. I guess Blue is supposed to be SpongeBob's uncle. But the thing is that this is not the original Gary. In fact, all the Garys keep passing on of old age. But Sandy and the others, instead of telling SpongeBob the truth, they just keep on getting him replacement Garys and are pretending that it's the same Gary. And Squidward's getting to a point where he's like, just tell him the bloody truth. He's never going to grow up if you guys keep coddling him. And, you know, Sandy's getting all pissy with Squidward and refuses to do so. So that's pretty much how the story ends. pretty much ends with, Squidward's final monologue saying that nothing changes in Bikini Bottom. And that's where we go into the second story, which the second story is 4 chapters long and it's called Finite. So here's a summary for this one. Squidward thought that everything in his life would forever be set in stone, but when something unexpected happens, something that catches him completely off guard, how will the cynical squid, I'm just going to say squid, because I know I can't speak today, deal with it? Rated T for character deaths, but otherwise it's a K-rated story. So this is rated T, which they just said that, I'm sorry. It's humor drama. The characters are Squidward and Squilliam. It's 4 chapters long, but it's over 16,000 words, 5 reviews, 11 faves, 3 follows, and this was published back in May of 2021. Here's the author's note. This is a sequel to my first SpongeBob fic, Some Things Never Change. This chapter takes place on the exact same day. You should read the fic before reading this one, otherwise you'll be confused. So, it pretty much exactly leaves off where the last one was. And, there's just some shenanigans going on inside of the Krusty Krab. And Squidward decides to take advantage of Mr. Krabs not being there, and he messes around with the clock to set it forward by a couple of hours so then he can say that the Krusty Krab is closed. Because he just wants to get out of work early that day. So, he does that. But before he does that, I'm sorry, I almost forgot about this part. Before he does that, Mr. Krabs has called to tell Squidward that he's going to be gone the following day as well. And it sounds like there's like a bit of a commotion going on. From Squidward's point of view, he hears like a commotion's going on for Mr. Krabs, and when it goes to Mr. Krabs' point of view, he's like fighting off some snow crabs or something like that. So it's definitely a deal that Mr. Krabs is not where he says he's going to be. So, after he gets off the phone with Mr. Krabs, that's when he decides to close the store a couple of hours early by setting the clock forward by a couple of hours and being like, oh, it's actually 6:20, we're closed, even though people that have watches are like, oh, no, my watch says it's this time, and he's like, no, it's actually not. So, he tells SpongeBob that, the Krusty Krab is closed, and SpongeBob's a bit bummed out, but he accepts it. And when Squidward gets home, for some reason, Patrick is in his house. And Squidward's like, you know what, whatever, I'm just going to drug him. He gives him, like, warm milk, and this knocks out Patrick. And, he goes to pick up the paper, and he reads in the paper that apparently his rival, Squilliam, passed away. And this is like a 2-day-old paper, so he turns on the news to see if it's true. And lo and behold, it is true. Squilliam is dead. And, you would think Squidward would be happy about this, but the thing is, he's not. He just feels really hollow, and it's just bothering him. Right, let's see. So that's pretty much what happens in the first chapter. So, the second chapter, he's kind of like reminiscing on his last encounter with Squilliam. And it's a deal that this happened, like, I think 3 years ago. And it was one of Mr. Krabs' schemes where he was having them be a catering service, and they had to do a birthday party at Squilliam's house. Now, Squilliam was supposedly celebrating his 36th birthday, but he's not really 36. He's the same age as Squidward. So at this point, he was probably like 56 or 57. And, he's doing his normal spiel with Squidward, rubbing his wealth and being successful into Squidward's face, but then he's like saying how, he does admire Squidward because Squidward never gives up and stuff like that. So Squidward is feeling pretty down about himself. So the next chapter, because this is pretty much what this second chapter was. I mean, it's a long story, but there's a lot of like in-depth things going on here, so I'm summarizing it very quickly for you all. But if you want to read the story in its entirety, I would recommend that you do, because there's a lot of stuff that I'm glossing over. So the final chapter, the second to last chapter, let's see. Oh, so this, I got a little confused here. I forgot that the next chapter, it opens up from Mr. Krabs' point of view. The story's a little confusing about the transitions here. It goes to Mr. Krabs' point of view, and he's fighting off something. What is he fighting? Oh yeah, I think he's fighting off... What is he fighting off? I don't think it's supposed to be the snow crabs anymore. we'll just assume it's still the snow crabs. But anyway, it's going from his point of view because he's on the phone with Squidward and he's telling Squidward that he will be back the following day and telling Squidward to be at the Krusty Krab at 7 o'clock sharp and yada yada yada. So, you know, Squidward gets off the phone with Mr. Krabs, and the Krusty Krab is slow like it was the day before because of the whole thing with Squilliam's funeral and whatnot. And, you know, Sandy comes in, and him and Sandy have a bit of a heart-to-heart. Like, you know, he's telling Sandy that he's feeling a bit hollow about the whole thing with Squilliam. And Sandy starts to open up to him about, you know, how her parents weren't really accepting of her being, let's be real, a tomboy. And, you know, she goes on about how she has managed to be successful, but then she feels bad because she didn't mean to be braggadocious with Squidward, but he doesn't really mind it so much. And, you know, she's saying to him, it's like, well, maybe you're upset about Squilliam because he didn't get to have the last word. So, you know, Squidward considers that for a bit. They continue to have a nice heart-to-heart, him and Sandy. And that's pretty much how the third chapter goes. It goes on like this for quite a bit. And so the final chapter, I think, yeah, this chapter I'd say is the shortest. Pretty much in this chapter, Squidward goes down to the cemetery to talk to Squilliam. And of course, Squilliam's gravestone is like the most ridiculously sized gravestone in the world. Oh, I forgot to mention that in the third chapter, for some reason, Plankton was trying to steal the formula to the Krabby Patty. And apparently, because he was keeping himself alive artificially and he forgot to do something with his suit, so he just kind of spontaneously combusts in front of them and dies. So that was really random. Sorry about almost forgetting that. It was just such a random thing that happened, but it happened, I suppose. So anyway, he goes to the cemetery, and, you know, he starts talking to Squilliam's gravestone, and, you know, he's talking about how, you know, he is not going to continue to dwell on his failures and stuff like that, and that he's going to move on with his life, and that he's not going to, you know, let Squilliam bother him like what he said to Squidward in the past. He's not going to let that be his drive anymore, and that he's going to move on with his life, and that he's going to enjoy the last few remaining years of his life while he can, because, you know, he's reflecting that he's almost 60, and that, you know, he wasted so much of his time trying to one-up Squilliam, and it was for nothing. And, you know, he even begrudgingly admits that he does admire SpongeBob, because even though SpongeBob is technically not exactly a very successful person, SpongeBob sees himself as a successful person because, you know, he's the best fry cook at the Krabby Patty, and he doesn't rub that in anyone's face, you know, because SpongeBob is rather innocent. So, you know, Squidward pretty much leaves. He says to the gravestone, goodbye, Squilliam, and he goes and leaves and moves on with his life, and that's pretty much how the story ends. Sorry if this summarized review was a bit rushed. It's just that there's so much that happens in this story especially that I would recommend that if you guys are interested to just read the story as a whole on your own time, because there's so much that goes on with like Squidward's inner monologue that I wasn't able to cover because, you know, the story is like, you know, over 16,000 words. But both stories were relatively good. I do not understand why the first story was called a parody, because it wasn't a parody. And there were a couple of little minor typos, and the transitions between, like, Squidward and Mr. Krabs' point of view could have been handled much better than it was, but aside from that, it was relatively well written. This person, might as well see how many other stories they've written. So they have written in total, I just need to scroll by, they've written like 11 stories, and it's not just SpongeBob. They've done Loud House, All Hail King Julian, which I've never heard of that. It seems like it's just those ones. A lot of All Hail King Julian, another Loud House fanfic, a couple more SpongeBob fanfiction, but, you know. So, kind of like a mixed bag of stories, but it seems like the three main fandoms that he's done for is Loud House, SpongeBob SquarePants, and All Hail King Julian. So I'd recommend that you check this author out. Well, thank you all for watching today's episode. If you liked it, please be sure to leave a like and leave a comment. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please do. I would greatly appreciate it. I'll see you all in the next episode. Until then, cheerio.